So, where were we? Ah, yes. Europe had gone completely bananas. The year is 1917. And spoiler alert, it's about to get even worse. On the Western Front, life was just delightful, if you were a rat. For everyone else, it was miles of muddy, waterlogged trenches where the main activities were sitting, shivering, and contemplating how much everything sucked. Morale was lower than the trenches themselves. Soldiers on both sides were getting pretty tired of the whole charge into machine gun fire routine. Generals, however, were still convinced that just one more push would do it. So they kept throwing men and metal at each other, gaining a few miserable kilometers of shell-blasted wasteland, only to lose it again the next week. It was like the world's deadliest and most expensive game of Red Rover. This whole bloody stalemate was turning into a war of attrition. The new plan was simple. Just wait for the other guy to run out of people. It was grim. Very, very grim. Meanwhile, out on the high seas, things were getting spicy. Britain's mighty navy had Germany locked in a crushing blockade, basically putting a giant close sign on all of its ports. Germany was slowly starving. So, Germany decided to fight back with its own brand of naval nastiness. These sneaky submarines started playing a very unfair game of peekaboo with any ship heading to Britain. Merchant ships, passenger ships, a ship full of rubber ducks. It didn't matter if it fluted Germany was sinking it. Cut it, eat, unrestricted submarine warfare, which is a fancy way of saying, we're torpedoing everything. Deal with it. This, as you might imagine, really started to tick some people off. Specifically, it ticked off the United States. America had been trying its best to stay out of the European mess, content to sit on the sidelines, selling weapons to everyone, and making a tidy profit. President Woodrow Wilson was re-elected on the slogan, "He kept us out of war." But Germany's U-boats kept sinking American ships, and that was bad for business. And for, American lives. The U.S. sent angry notes, saying, "Hey, cut it out." Germany would promise to be good, then go right back to sinking things a few weeks later. This happened more times than you'd think. The final straw came in the form of a ridiculously foolish telegram. German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann sent a secret message to Mexico. It basically said, "Hey, Mexico, how'd you like to invade the United States? If you do, and we win, we'll totally give you back Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Sound good?" Unfortunately for Germany, Britain intercepted this little message and gleefully passed it on to Washington. America's reaction was, shall we say, not pleased. Sinking their ships was one thing, but trying to get their southern neighbor to invade them. Oh, it was on. On April 6th, 1917, the U.S. Congress declared war on Germany. Fresh-faced, enthusiastic American soldiers, known as doughboys, started packing their bags for Europe. This was terrible news for Germany. They knew they were on a timer, but just as the U.S. was getting in, another major player was getting out. In Russia, things had gone from bad to worse to full-on revolutionary meltdown. The Russian people were starving, the army was getting demolished, and everyone was sick of the Tsar. So, in February 1917, they had a revolution. The Tsar was out, and a provisional government was in. But they made a huge mistake. They kept Russia in the war. The people were not happy. So, Germany, in a stroke of genius madness, decided to help things along. They found the most radical anti-war Russian revolutionary they could find. A guy named Vladimir Lenin, put him on a sealed train and shipped him straight to Russia. It was like mailing a bomb to your enemy's house. And it worked. In October, Lenin and his Bolsheviks launched a second revolution, seized power, and immediately pulled Russia out of the war. They signed a treaty with Germany, giving up a huge chunk of territory in exchange for peace. For Germany, this was fantastic news. With Russia out, they could move all their troops from the Eastern Front to the West. They had one last chance to win the war before the Americans arrived in force. In the spring of 1918, they launched a massive all-or-nothing attack. The spring offensive, using new stormtrooper tactics, they smashed through the Allied lines, For a moment it looked like they might actually win. They pushed closer to Paris than they had been in years, but they had a problem. They had advanced so fast, they outran their supplies. Their soldiers were exhausted and starving. They also discovered that the Allied trenches weren't just full of bullets, but also full of delicious food and cigarettes, which was a bit distracting for an army on the brink of starvation. And then the Americans showed up. And they kept showing up, thousands upon thousands of them, pouring into France. The Allied counterattack, the 100 Days Offensive, was relentless, with fresh American troops and new technology like tanks being used more effectively. The Allies began to push the Germans back. And this time they didn't stop. The German army, battered, starved, and demoralized, began to collapse. At home, the German people were starving. Strikes were breaking out, and the Kaiser's generals told him the war was lost. So he did what any sensible emperor would do. He abdicated and fled the country. Germany became a republic and immediately asked for an armistice. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. World War I was over. The aftermath was devastating. Empires had crumbled, millions were dead, and a whole generation was lost. And so, the leaders of the victorious powers gathered at Versailles to figure out how to build a new world. They wanted to create a peace that would last forever. They blamed Germany for everything and handed them a bill so large it made their eyes water, took away their colonies, and severely limited their military. This, they were sure, would prevent any future wars. Right? What could possibly go wrong? Thanks for watching. Do you unforget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss our next oversimplified adventure. See you next time.